Hi, Professor. Um, I have been rumbling to uh, submit my assignment in the sense that wanted to write it, but I have been so caught up with work and other stuff. So uh, from all of my long research and of finding the group interacting and talking with people from the from the Nigerian Act Center in Minnesota, I have come to conclude that I would do a video uh, on my reflection that would demonstrate what I have been, what I know about the Nigerian culture, how it interplay with globalization, how it also map not just with the Soros praxis model, but also with Crenshaw mapping the margin, where we talk about cultural barriers, language barriers, how all of these uh, issues affect the establishment of the Nigerian Center. As I wrote it, my Iep Reflection, I will first read and then go over it. From Nigeria to America, the process of globalization have paved for global interdependence both economically and socially, increasing cooperations and establishing an intercultural communication in the context of rapid globalization. Because globalization brings people of different cultures, cultural approaches, beliefs, and practices in an intercultural space, the establishment of the Nigeria Art Center would not have been established without globalization and intercultural communication. Free trade and economic globalization entails different cultural group, race, different cultural group raised from geographic boundaries to interconnect and share human progress in society. While I elaborate on the establishment of the Nigeria Art Center and its emergence, I did so with sufficient research conducted and the progress of globalization people have made in our global intercultural space. Let's come to the Nakayama. Nakayama's social science approach theory talks about the importance of culture. He mentioned culture is variable. So when culture is variable, in my point of view, it means it can be measured. How can it be measured? It is measured by our language, by the cultural barrier, one being a different group, one being another group, how we come to exist in terms of trade, in terms of cooperating to meet society needs and wants. Globalization, and I will talk about a lot about globalization, even Sorrell's Hard Chapter 2, where she talked about understanding the context of globalization. And when I think that come into play that the Nigerian Art Center, the establishment of the Nigerian Art Center meant that Sorrell's understand the concept of globalization in Sorrell's book talks about more on how we come to meet in a global space, how we come to talk about culture. But culture cannot function if we do not interconnect, if we do not share that space. Because, like I said, I will want to understand and know the Nigerian culture. And looking at Soros Spectrum model, if I try to deep dive into what that culture is, what I'm doing, I'm inquiring. I'm trying to get a deeper sense and understanding of what Nigerian culture is. How did it come to be? How did it exist? What they share, their belief, their values. And it is very important that we mention and I understand that, especially when you in class will talk about more every day, all of ours sometimes, about culture. Now, which means it can be measured. He also stated, Sorrells also stated that it can be measured. He also stated or claimed that culture influences communication. Yes, culture does influences communication. How? The Nigerian Arts Center speaks different languages that Nigerians will understand. Coming to, if I decide to go to the Arts Center, what is important, and I want to get this clear, what is important is that I need to know some of what is being talked about, if I am correct. Some of what have been established. What are the language barriers that will suffocate or stagnate my intercultural space with Nigeria culture? And it is important. It is very important that we know how culture affects communication, because if the fact that that the Arts Center is situated in Minneapolis, it is Minneapolis, metropolitan city, of course, lively. A lot of people come to see different things. So I need to come and I need to understand in dealing, in transacting, the transactional activities between me and Nigeria, I have to understand that, of course, they have to speak English, not Igbo, or not that local dialect. If they're speaking that local dialect, I'm not going to understand it. Even if I'm going to buy, just say, a wristbands or whatever from the Arts Center, if they're speaking their language, I'm not going to understand it. If they're speaking a local vernacular, I'm not going to understand it. What I am going to understand is English. So even if one there that doesn't speak English, they need to have an interpreter that will interpret to me. So that when culture affect communication, it affect communication in the transaction of globalization. Because globalization, we always talk about, brings about free trade, brings about understanding how we exist, how we come to be. So if I am to go there to buy or interact, there must be people or someone there that will speak the English for me to understand. And that's how I think culture affect communication. Based on a social cultural research conducted by me on the Nigerian Arts Center, I agreed with Nakayama, because culture is beyond traditional beliefs and practices. It is and concerned about what we eat, where our history, how we came to exist as a cultural group, language we speak, how it interplay with our intercultural space and globalization. Yes, as I mentioned, culture is not just centered around beliefs. It's centered around us understanding everything that is around us. everything that we see around us. Our structural intersectionality, our language, our cultural identity in class, in society. We cannot extenuate these things when we know they exist. And that is why, even if I to understand or go to deeper involve myself in Nigerian culture, the language will affect me knowing everything. And it also could help me understand everything. If someone explains what it is. In facing globalization, ideas that provide evidence that the epicenter of Nigerians influence cultural communications with a specific group of culture as Nigerians. I interviewed Benjamin Okoro, out of the 3 owners of the Nigerian Center. Benjamin Okoro, and what he said. The first thing he mentioned was establishing the Art Center was difficult. The political intersectionality that Crenshaw talks about, the interplay with that existence. Because establishing such an Art Center, different culture, in a metropolitan city, the actors, getting the stakeholders, getting the ideas across for the establishment, he said was not something easy. It was difficult. It meant that he had to lobby in a sense. He had to wrap his ideas around representatives, around governance, around local officials, understanding the importance, giving them a deeper understanding of why the Art Center establishment going to be based in Minnesota, what it's going to do, how it's going to affect people of different culture, how it's going to be a base Art Center in Minneapolis that will keep the Nigerian understanding where they come from. Too many times we forget where we come from. Because when we grow up in a different environment, we grow up to understand not just our culture. We forget to understand our culture. We adapt to understand the dominant culture. And he said they wanted to keep the flow of that culture in a place that everyone will come to see what to do, that beliefs and value system. His engagement to allow the establishment was politicized. His documents were penning, he said, for weeks. Because people wanted to know the important, what he was going to do on that establishment. And I love Crenshaw. When I read her entire essay, when she talks about structural political intersectionality, that when it comes to me, that when we look at the political norms of our surrounding, that's when we look at who we go to, who we interact with, how we get this happen. And Okoro said there was less and less of pressure. He said coming to the U.S. provided him the opportunity and the establishment of that center, open globalization. One, I know that the United States economy is a capitalist economy. They look at more money than profit over mean being black, that or being black also in establishing that act center as a black group, a black cultural group. Let's think about it. Do we want us to talk about the race that will be involved? We're not going to stretch to that. But let's look at being black and in white. Our last conversations that we talk more of racism in being whiteness. And I can just think about what happened or how that happened to have that establishment. So it opened up globalization. It opened up globalization because how? I know, Professor, you want to know how? Did it open up globalization? Because different culture came to exist to share the Nigerian culture. And that's what he said. When people come in that intercultural spaces, to share the belief, their values, the system, where they belongs, buying of commodities, the exchange of commodities. That's globalization. They pay tax to government. That's globalization. That's bringing cultures together in our intercultural space. We all know that when we migrate for economic, political benefits. And when the Nigerians migrated or came to the US, they came based on the fact to seek better living. And globalization says it right. It brings people of different race, different culture together for the common good of society. Race. Race. And yet, they claim that culture comes with understanding globalization is also was established in 51 chapter 2 of understanding the context of globalization in Sorrells, that the global justice movement comes with our collective ideas. An example with what Okoro said. Living in the United States had been a struggle, and I understand that. Living in a country, yet that gives us so much, but yet has some system that needs to be changed. The other races, sorry. Maxie Anahan talks about wealth, global wealth, intercultural dimension of political globalization, as I talk about. An example when we share that where we come from, the understand the importance is significant, that we know how we exist. Our ideas are compounded into globalization. When we globalize in our intercultural space, we seek political, we seek economic, we seek social benefits. What I do love, and Nakayama, very good readings. Thank you, Professor, that you really provided us so much. And I love Nakayama reading because when the critical approach in Nakayama readings includes that include our understanding of power structure. And power structure influence globalization. Anahan said, there's no way we will have functioned without different cultures, without different people coming together to share our culture. He said we exist because of our intercultural space. We develop our ideas, we grow as a business because of our ideas, and yes, because of our accent. What the practical Soros practice model talks about. Our curiosity, our positioning, and our framing. Our curiosity to know and understand. That's what he said, to understand. The culture of Nigeria. All of these resources for my gatherings have been on Sorrell's Intercultural Communication, our textbook. My sources have come from Nakayama. It had come from my 3 people that I had long interview with. Okoro, Anaha, and Richie. And we conclude that culture when we talk about culture, we talk about globalization. And globalization brings the world closer in our intercultural space. Thank you.